I do appreciate the informality of your meetings. It's fun. I haven't been here in a couple years, I think. I started coming up before Greg came, after Mike retired. I've spoken to you a few times, and it's always been fun. I need to point out that I'm no longer in my 50s. A couple things have changed since I was here last. My glasses are thicker. I take more pills than I used to. And I'm sure I'm not sharing anything new with you guys. I also have a new Bible I just bought. I bought it because it has, well, you could probably read it from space. And it takes more room on this much smaller podium than we used to have up here. But, yeah, I guess we'll have to get used to that, huh? The title that I gave Sarah when she asked me what I was going to talk about is always sort of a, gosh, that's the last thing I think about is a title. What do I say? I want to speak to you about the book of Ruth. It's been on my mind for a while to address the topic of why do bad things happen to good people? And we all know that, okay, it's somewhere in our heart we say, well, it's God's plan, and His plan is much bigger than us. And that plan is played out many, many times in the Bible. The book of Job is all about circumstances that none of which were Job's fault, but he had to endure. In the New Testament, we typically find people who have spent their whole life lame or blind or something, just so Christ could come up and heal them. And then they had a testimony about who Christ was. Lazarus died just so that the disciples could see Jesus raising a man from the dead. That seems kind of extreme, doesn't it? But it's all part of a bigger plan. And one we don't think of a lot of times when we think of this bigger plan, how it affects our lives, is the circumstances that Naomi was put in the book of Ruth. In your Bible, there's the first 5 books of Moses, and then there's the book of Joshua, where the people crossed over and went into the promised land. And then after Joshua died, some degree of chaos ensued, and God sent deliverers periodically to conquer the enemies and to direct the people back towards God. And that's in the book of Judges. And there is a resounding theme in the book of Judges that is repeated in the very last verse of Judges. It says, in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And you find that same verse 5 or 6 times in the book of Judges as it talks about all these people and this chaos that was ensuing. And it never talks very much about how it infects individual people until you get to Ruth. Ruth is the book right after Judges. And it says, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. So this story is in that setting of no king and no real direction and people doing what they want to do. And it said there was a famine in the land, the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey, had dried up. For some reason, there was a famine. There wasn't food. And a certain man of Bethlehem. Bethlehem means the breadbasket. It was the place of prosperity, the place where the crops always were fruitful. And here was a famine. Something was wrong in the land. The circumstances had changed. And the book of Ruth never says exactly why or how that came to be. And I look back in the book of Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy, that book, one of Moses' books, chapter 11, and I find this passage. And it shall be that if you earnestly obey my commandments, which I command you today, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, Then I will give you the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the latter rain, that you may gather in your grain, your new wine, and your oil. And I will send grass into the fields for your livestock, that you may eat and be filled. Take heed to yourselves, lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them, lest the Lord's anger be aroused against you, and he shut up the heavens, so that there is no rain, and the land yield no produce, and you perish quickly from the good land which the Lord is giving you. And it appears, based on the evidence in the Bible, that may be the case at this point. It's a time when Israel walked with God under some judge, and then when he was gone, they drifted back into their old ways. Remember, the people came into the land of Israel, the promised land, and their command was to drive out all the inhabitants that were there previously. And they did that, somewhat, most of the time, except for a few. And the thing was, if you leave these people there who don't worship God, they worship false gods, you're going to eventually follow them. They were told that, right? And here, take heed lest your heart be deceived and you turn aside and serve other gods. That may be the situation that's happening right here in the beginning of Ruth. And for some reason, Ruth's husband, or not Ruth, Naomi is the star of the show now. Let's not forget Naomi. I'm going to say Ruth at the wrong time. Naomi is the mother of this group of people. It said, a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. I find Ephrathite and Bethlehem connected a lot. I think maybe Bethlehem was the village in this area that was called Ephrathite. You find it in Genesis 1st, where Abraham buried his wife, was Ephrathite, that place. And so they went and went to dwell in the country of Moab. 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They went to the country of Moab and remained there. This was not supposed to be a permanent move. They're just looking for something better until times get better. The circumstances in Bethlehem were bad. Moab must have looked better for some reason. That's where they went. And then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. So Naomi is a widow, but she has 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. It doesn't say a lot about those, but there is, again, a hint about these 2 sons. Their names themselves. They would translate something like sickly and frailty, or puny and weakling, or maybe deafness and dying. So maybe these kids were already sick from birth. They were just not in good health. They managed to travel to Moab. They were old enough to have wives. And then it says after they married, they lived there another 10 years before they died. Now they took wives from Moab. Their wives were not Israelites or Jews. They were girls from Moab, which was not supposed to happen. Both Mahlon and Chilion died, so the woman survived her 2 sons and her husband. The circumstances looking kind of dire. Naomi has no husband to take care of her, no sons to take care of her, and 2 daughter-in-laws that look to her for help. What do you do in this case? In the New Testament, there is a direction to churches and to people of the church to take care of widows, take care of their own. But they're in Moab. We don't know what the traditions are in Moab. In the New Testament, it sort of repeats the Old Testament custom. It says, if any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, Do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. Honor widows who are really widows. If any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and repay their parents. For this is good and acceptable unto God. In this case, that doesn't work for Naomi. There are no children. What in the world is she going to do? She decides to get up and go back to Bethlehem, the place where they left more than 10 years before. The circumstances that drove them to Moab seem to have changed. It says, she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return to the country, from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. Something has changed. Maybe a judge arose. The people of Israel have repented, and God sent the rain. In anticipation of a good harvest, Naomi heads back to Bethlehem. The situation there has improved, and maybe she still has family there or people who know her. And in fact, she does. So she goes back to Judah. Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return each to their mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dwelt with the dead, after you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you find rest, each in the house of her husband." So she kissed them, and they lifted their voices and wept. And they said to her, "Surely will we return to you with your people." Okay. But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. And if I said I should have hope, if I should have a husband and have sons, would you wait for them till they were grown?" This doesn't sound right, she says. "Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Three times already, Naomi has referred to the Lord. And in reading between the lines, trying to figure out this whole situation, to me, Naomi sounds like a woman of faith. She trusts the Lord. She didn't say, "The Lord has been mean to me." She said, "Yeah, the hand of the Lord has, been against me, but it's the Lord's doing." I'm afraid that when she went to Moab, maybe she didn't think that was such a good idea. Maybe she wanted to stay in the land of the Lord, but she followed her husband. Things did not go well for them there, but she must have been declaring her faith and living her faith the whole time, because one of her daughters-in-law saw her faith in spite of all of the circumstances. They lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah, one of the daughters-in-law, kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after her." And this is the part that you hear in weddings. I think we talked about that earlier today. There's a little phrase right here that is quite often incorporated into our weddings. "Entreat me not to leave you or turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me." Ruth saw something special in the behavior of Naomi. Her faith, her absolute trust in the Lord. Ruth sees something in Naomi's optimism. She believes. Both daughters-in-law saw and heard the exact same testimony. One believed, one did not. And as we talk to our friends and relatives and those people we hand into, we have to remember that it's the Lord who calls. We can witness, we can encourage, we can share the word, but the Lord calls. He called Ruth. He didn't call Orpah. Some people I know that are consider themselves to be personal evangelists sometimes get frustrated with the fact that there's someone they've been working on and they just can't save. Like, you can't save them. God calls. I got to get on the right page here. So, Naomi comes back to Bethlehem. Verse 18 in chapter 1, when she saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. Now the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem. And it happened when they had come to Bethlehem that all the city was excited because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" I haven't seen that before, but it seems strange that a woman comes in and the whole city is excited. Was Elimelech someone of stature or someone important that left? I don't know. But all the city is excited to see her come back. She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara." The word Naomi means pleasant, and Mara means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? There again, no accusing, no, he's treated me wrongly. She never says, I don't deserve this. She says, this has happened. It's the Lord's hand. I recognize that. I've come back empty. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. I looked it up. When does the barley harvest even happen? I mean, wouldn't that be an important thing? If you read this book, it sounds like it all happens in 3 days, but it did not. It's in my notes. It's somewhere towards the end of March. And the barley harvest extends for several weeks. Then after that's the wheat harvest. So she was back there sometime in early March. The harvest has just started. And here they are. Now a new character is introduced. A new character here. There was a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. So Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to a field and glean the heads of grain after him in whose sight I may find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." And she left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. What is gleaning? What's the Bible say about gleaning? Well, I had to look it up here on Wikipedia first. It says, gleaning is the act of collecting leftover crops from the farmer's fields after they had been commercially harvested or on fields where it is not economically profitable to harvest. Several years ago, down by the airport there in Myrtle Creek, a company leased one of those fields out there for growing crops, and they grew tomatoes. They had 2 or 3 of these huge patches of organically grown tomatoes. And when the harvest came, you guys have probably bought organic food in the store, and it always looks so perfect and so wonderful. And it just must be some special deal about the organic process, right? No. They pick out only the very best fruit to take to market. And as you know, the price you pay pays for more than just what you get. It also pays for all that fruit that gets left behind in the fields. So there were these 2 big fields of organic tomatoes down there in Myrtle Creek, and one of the gentlemen from our church, after the harvesters had come through and got the tomatoes they wanted, they fill up the aisles with just rows and rows of tomatoes that are too big or too small or not shaped right, or who knows what's wrong with them. And we got permission. I went down there in about 30 minutes and filled up 6 big tubs full of tomatoes. And I took them home and spent the next 3 days making tomato sauce, which makes a number 10 can of tomato sauce actually look pretty cheap when you spend 3 days making a couple gallons of tomato sauce. Anyway, gleaning, going out and picking what gets left behind. That was a process in the land of Israel. It was written into the rules that if you planted a field of grain, you did not harvest the corners. They were left for the poor and the needy. And as you went through your field, whatever grain fell, whatever grain sort of got left on the ground, you didn't send the little kids back in there to clean all that up. You left it for the poor. And so Ruth went out where they were harvesting the grain, and she began following the reapers and picking up what was left behind that she was allowed to keep for herself. That is how the poor were provided for in Israel. It wasn't a handout. They had to actually go get it. And she went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and as she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered him, "The Lord bless you." These sound like believers? Kind of easy to pick a Christian out of the crowd, isn't it? And sometimes in my classroom at school, I like to play a little background music, kind of fill in the voids. I don't let the kids wear hats or have their own phones or do other things in class, but if they want some music, I'll play some background music. And usually, my objection to the kids listening to their own music is they're concentrating on what the lyrics are. They're kind of singing along. They're following the music more than they're doing their work. I have found if I play elevator music, if you like to call it, if I get on YouTube and play some Christian hymns, just the instrumental versions, there's very few kids out there that know the lyrics to those. And so they aren't following along. And then sometimes I'll play some other Christian music. And just in general, the kids know that they don't swear or curse in my classroom. And there are kids that know that I'm a Christian even though I've never told them that. I've gone out other places in public. When I was a log truck driver, one of my loader operators one morning, and I'd hauled log, we hadn't had more than 25 words of conversation, I don't think. But one morning, as I unloaded my trailer, the loader operator came down and says, "You're a religious man," and he threw some situation out there you wanted to talk about. Like, okay, I don't remember ever having that conversation with you, but yes. And you probably found that in your own lives. People recognize you as being Christian. And by this guy's greeting, I'm going to say, he's a man who loves the Lord and attributes his good fortune, he was a great man of great wealth, to the Lord, just as much as Ruth attributed her circumstances to the hand of the Lord. So, this man shows up somewhere. Nine, was it 9? No. Yes. The Lord be with you. Verse 5, okay. When Boaz said to his servant, who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" There's an extra person out there in the field. So the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered and said, "It is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." I don't know if she introduced herself or if he already knew her reputation, but he knew that, hey, this was Ruth, she's with Naomi. And she said, "Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." Wasn't asking for a handout, went looking to glean, do the work, collect what was left over. So she came and has continued from morning until now, although she did rest in the house for a little while. And then Boaz, who went over to Ruth, said, "You will listen, my daughter, will you not? Do not go to glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close by my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. Whoa! Wait a minute. When do the Jews mix with Gentiles? This is a segregated society. This woman is like we used to treat another class of people in our country. We don't share with them. They're over there. And yet she's invited to go and drink out of the Jews' water. And pretty quick she's going to be invited to sit at their table. What in the heck is that all about? You ever wonder that? Why so welcoming to someone from a foreign country when the people of Israel are supposed to be separate? Did anyone ever become a Jew that wasn't a Jew to start with? Did Ruth have faith in God? Did she trust the same God that Naomi had? It appears that she did. Did her lifestyle show it? So she fell on her face and bowed down to the ground and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I'm a foreigner?" And Boaz answered and said to her, "It has been fully reported to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you've left your father and your mother and the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." I was telling some people earlier today that this is the church I grew up in. My family used to live in the area. And this built room used to be different. There used to be a little stage over here at the pulpit, and then the pews went this way. And somewhere right about where Mr. Combs is sitting, I was either on that side or this side, I don't remember, when I first heard the gospel and came and placed my trust in the Lord and sought refuge with Him. Sounds like Ruth has confessed to being a believer. The Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Foreigners could join the Israelis. There are several examples of that. There were policies. In Deuteronomy, it talks about harboring refugees who've come there for safety. There's other people in the Bible who have been from foreign countries who have become Jews and joined them. Rahab, for instance, Moses' wife, Joseph's wife, possibly Caleb, one of the spies. They keep saying he was a Kirizzite. And in Egypt, it mentions a mixed multitude of people who came from outside and joined the Jewish community and became a part of that. And so that appears to be what was offered to Ruth, and what she accepted is to become a Jew. She's put her trust in the Lord, under whose wings she has come for refuge. She said, "Let me find favor in your sight, for you have comforted me and have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants." And now Boaz said to her at mealtime, here's another one of those, maybe a violation, but not really. "Come here and eat of the bread, and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar." So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed parched grain to her, and she ate and was satisfied. In the New Testament, there's a place where Peter and the church are all eating together, and then suddenly when some Jews show up, Peter and some of his friends separate and go eat with the Jews because they're not supposed to eat with Gentiles. And Paul jumps on them and says, "That's not right." Well, that was the tradition, though. Gentiles didn't eat with the Jews. Gentiles were non-Jews. Here, she is invited to sit with the Israelites and have meals. So she truly has dedicated herself and joined this Jewish community. And then after the meal, when she rose up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves. Do not reproach her." Let grain from the bundles fall purposely for her. Leave it that she may glean. Do not rebuke her. He didn't tell them to glean for her, didn't tell them to hand it to her. Let her feel valuable. Let her pick it up. Let this poor person earn her own way. So she gleaned in the field till evening and beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. I've never stopped to find out how big an ephah was. I don't know if it's a quart or a gallon or what. But later on in the book, she carries home 6 ephahs of grain, so it can't be like a big bushel. I think that'd be too much. But, I don't know, maybe a gallon or so. She gets this grain. She goes home, and she sees Naomi. And I guess this is a good catch. This is a lot of grain for gleaning, I would say. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where have you gleaned today, and where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you." I'm about verse 19 now in chapter 2. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, "The man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz." And Naomi says, "Oh, Boaz, we know him. He's part of our family." That's a paraphrase. This man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives. And then Ruth said, "He also said to me, 'You shall stay close by my young men until you have finished all my harvest.' And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, 'It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, and that people do not meet you in any other field.' So she stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the end of the wheat harvest." According to my notes, my studies, the barley harvest started in late March, followed by the wheat harvest, which extended into May. And according to Deuteronomy 16, 9, and 10, this interval of time reflects the 7 weeks between Passover and the Festival of Weeks. So the harvest goes on for about 7 weeks, which is what, a month and a half? That's why I said the book didn't happen all in 3 days. It takes a while. So they had some time to build a relationship there. And she stayed till the end of the wheat harvest. And then this weird thing happens. She sneaks up on Boaz in the middle of the night, does some weird thing, uncovers his feet. He wakes up and notices her. And Naomi sent her to do this. She went and asked this man to marry her. Uncovered his feet. He woke up. She said, "Hey, we need a close relative to take care of this redeeming thing." And he goes to town and makes arrangements. Okay, there's always a red herring in there, right? He's a close relative, but there's a closer relative. This redemption thing. In Israel, when they divided up the land, every family was given their inheritance. And Naomi had sold that inheritance she had from Elimelech because she was poor. There was a process by which that could be bought back, and children could inherit that land again. But we previously said there's no children. Somehow Mahlon and Chilion never managed to father children. They were married for 10 years and there were no children. Ruth doesn't have any children. Naomi doesn't have any children. But this close relative thing is an Israeli policy set forth by God, while that Ruth could have children that would inherit Elimelech's land and continue that family line. And that's what they're trying to set up here. Ruth needs to get married to a close relative, have children that will inherit this land that was sold, and then that relative also needs to buy back that land so they can give it to the children. Is that complicated? The circumstances get kind of wrapped up here, don't they? So, she went home. Okay, she lay at his feet till morning, rose before one could recognize her. Then he said, "Do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Bring the shawl that is with you." And he dumped 6 ephahs of barley into it, laid it on her. That's where I said there must be enough to carry if it's six of these things. And she went into the city. When she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "Is that you, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, "These 6 ephahs of barley he gave me, for he said to me, 'Do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law.' Then she said, 'Sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out. The man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day.'" So Boaz is going to make these arrangements to buy back the land and set up a marriage with Ruth and get everything done. But there's a closer relative that's in the way. The close relative of whom Boaz had spoken. This is chapter 4 now. He came by, and Boaz said, "Come aside, friend. Sit down here." So he came aside and sat down, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." Getting serious now. This guy doesn't know why he's been called, but we've got to have 10 witnesses about our conversation. Something's happening. He said to the close relative, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech, and I thought to inform you, saying, 'Buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. If you will not redeem it, then tell me, and I will know. There is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you.'" And the close relative says, "Yeah, I'm going to redeem that land." Boaz says, "By the way, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance." And this land comes with a bride. And then everything that you produce in your lifetime will be inherited by his kids. Uh-oh. The close relative said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it." He didn't want that inheritance to go to somebody else. He wanted his name associated with that. He didn't want to foul up his good name. And the book of Ruth never mentions his name. He didn't save his name at all, did he? But Boaz did what was right. He bought the land. He took Ruth as his wife. A strange situation. Who knows how this was supposed to turn out? It developed strange. One of the cool things about this book also, do you notice that women are the stars? That's not real often in the Bible. But this book is about women, the faith of Naomi and the faith of Ruth. So she does get married. She does have kids. It all turns out good. And the name of her son was Obed, who grew up in the house with Naomi and Ruth and learned their faith and passed it on to his son, a guy named Jesse, who had a scrawny little kid named David, a man after God's own heart. The circumstances turned out to bless the whole nation of Israel, because this one woman would not give up her faith in the land of Moab. Isn't that a cool story? Yeah. The circumstances can be quite surprising. Last time I was here, I think Mike Miller was telling you about the time I tried to kill him, as he said. The family camp was over at the coast, and my boat was over at the coast. I had a camp set up with a man named Dwayne over at the coast. In his front yard, there was like 3 of us that had campers in his yard and also room to park our boats. There was Leroy and his wife. There was Mike and Priscilla, and then there was my trailer and my boats over there. It was kind of convenient. It was a good deal. We had our hookups right there in Dwayne's yard. And my boat was over there, and it was September, and the tuna were still offshore. And I went up to camp on a Friday night and said, "Who wants to go tuna fishing tomorrow morning?" And we talked Mike into it. It turned out to be just me and Mike that went out in the ocean to go tuna fishing. And I don't know if you guys ever caught tuna, but they are a very, it's a fun fight. a tuna that big will fight like a salmon that big. And when you get a 20-pound tuna on the line, you've got a fight on your hands. And Mike was just saying it just about jerked his arms out of his shoulders. And unlike salmon fishing, where you can catch one fish, maybe two fish if you catch the right ones, the limit on tuna is 25 apiece a day. And I've never caught my limit, never. But Mike and I caught 12 tuna that day, and I let him reel in 10 of them. And he was done after the first one. Since then, my friend Dwayne has passed away, and his grandson took over ownership of that property at the coast. And so the next summer, Kyle said, yeah, things are going to stay kind of like they are. And the next summer, Mike and Patrice were there again, and I had my camper there. And not Mike and Priscilla. I keep saying Patrice. Priscilla. Mike and Priscilla, my camper was there, and I think Leroy was there. And a couple of Kyle's friends also were camped right there kind of in the area. And then the next summer I missed. And then this summer, when I got ready to go back there, Kyle said, yeah, there's a spot over there for you. And I got all ready to go over there, and turns out, oops, I'm sorry, one of my friends showed up and took that spot. So July 20th, I'm ready to go to the coast and set up a camp, and there's no place to camp. Well, in the meantime, Mike and Priscilla bought a house down in Bandon and, arranged down there. And I had been down there, and I knew they had a pretty good-sized yard. In fact, they lived in their camp trailer there while they were having the house put together and built. I said, well, maybe I'll call them up and find out if I can come down there and set up camp down there. It's not Charleston, but they have a way to get out in the ocean, and it'll work. And I tried to find Mike last Christmas, and they were out of town. And so I hadn't seen Mike and Priscilla in about 2 years. And I called up Mike, had to leave a message. And he called me back. Yeah, I can help you out. You'll have to come over and move some things. Okay, great. I don't know why he's whispering. I'm sure Priscilla knows me. It's okay. Got over there. We visited. We had a good time visiting. We caught up. And he showed me, what had to move and so forth. And Mike said one of his vocal cords had been paralyzed, so he couldn't talk. And he looked pretty much the same as he'd been, a little thinner. And then later he says, he can't talk. His wife told me. He can't talk because he has stage 4 cancer. So we got this on July 20th is when we found that out. And I went back over there 3 or 4 days later with my tractor and my trailer. We had to load up these trees that they'd cut down that were cut into logs and haul those off. And Mike came out and watched us, and he sat on the edge of the four-wheeler there and just kind of watched. And we visited and talked a little bit. And then that was on a Monday. I cleaned that up. And then 3 or 4 days later, I got the camp trailer hitched up, ready to move it over there. It was on a Saturday. So about a week, 10 days has passed. And went over with the camp trailer, backed it in there, got it all leveled up and set up. And they weren't home. But okay, thank you. I guess we'll talk to them later. I got home and I got the message that they'd taken Mike to the hospital. He wasn't doing well. And so that was on a Saturday. 2 days later, we went over there purposely to visit Mike at the hospital. And he seemed in good spirits. They had a feeding tube, and he was, still couldn't talk, but he was there. And there was 2 or 3 relatives they introduced me to. But things did not look good for Mike. The reason he was in the hospital is because the cancer had dissolved his throat. And anything he tried to swallow went into his lungs. And so they had things fixed, and they had a feeding tube and stuff. The following Saturday morning, I was at home. My wife was fixing to go to the coast to do something. I don't know what it was. I got a phone call. Can you come over and pray with us if you're in the area? We don't want to be an inconvenience. Yes, I can. I grabbed a clean shirt and my razor, cordless razor. Got to have that. But my wife was just like in the driveway ready to leave when I got this message. I went and jumped in the car with my razor and my clean shirt, and I'm going to go to the hospital to pray with Mike and his family. And on the way to the coast, do they want me to show up and pray for a minute and a half and leave? Or do they want more than that? If I have a Bible, I can read with them. I'm on the car on the way to the coast, I don't have a Bible. The circumstances of even being able to do this is like, how in the heck did I happen to call him right at the right time and reestablish contact? And the hospital will have a Bible. There's got to be a Gideon Bible in the hospital, right? Because I'm a Gideon, I know that. Got over there to the nurse's station with my clean shirt on, my clean-shaven face. I need a Bible. I have to go pray with some people. I need a Bible. Oh, we had to get rid of all those when COVID hit. And one of the nurses says, you know, I think I saw one stashed somewhere. So they went and got me a Bible. I don't know who stashed that Bible, but the circumstances were right. It was ESV. I read New King James. It was ESV. Okay, I can stumble through this. No big deal. So I went to Mike's room. They introduced me to all the relatives that were there, his whole family and an extended, there was 15 people in the hospital room. I read Psalm 139 with them. I addressed Mike for a minute. I prayed with them. At 6:45 that night, I got the message that Mike had passed away. Previously, I had shared faith with Mike. When we were cleaning up these logs in his yard, sometimes you sort of have to make an excuse to say what you want to say. And I was talking about all these projects I had, and then now the pastor's going to be out of town September 3rd, so I have to get a message ready for that. And I said, last time I did this, I shared such and such and such out of the book of Romans, the Romans road. And Mike said, well, his wife is the church person. Again, she had been to church. So I shared the Romans road with him. Do you believe this, Mike? And he said, I don't know what I believe. And then I didn't quite make it out what my wife said. What he said after that was, I need convinced. And so I'd shared the gospel with him. He was uncertain. As it turned out, that was my last chance. It's God that calls. It's up to us to testify. I don't know what Mike believed when he died. But the circumstances were there that I was able to be an influence in his life, to encourage his wife. As it turns out, Priscilla was a church-going lady and recently divorced with kids. A guy at the church knew Mike, whose wife had recently died and he had kids. And they got together, but he never really believed. She would keep going to church and he didn't. And that was the marriage they had for 30-some years, 40 years. I don't know how long it was. But he was always sort of on the edge, doubting. After Mike passed away, a week later when we were over there going fishing again, Priscilla came out of the house, came over and says, I want to talk with you guys. God sent you to be with me. She didn't thank me. She thanked God. And I think that's the appropriate response. We just followed God's leading. She was very thankful for God putting us into her life. The circumstances were weird. The circumstances were sad. She said, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I don't know why this happened, but I thank God for you guys. The circumstances that got her back with Christian people were dire. But I appreciated the opportunity to be there with her and for her. And she says, you know what I'm going to do this next week? I'm going to go down the road to that little white church. She hadn't been to church in years. She says, I'm going to go back down. I'm going to go to church. What a wonderful response from that woman. And I'm just so thankful that we had the chance to be there under those circumstances. Is that another cool story? So July 20th until August 5th is all we had with Mike. Just that quick. Amazing, isn't it? Heavenly Father, we thank you for having a plan that is greater than ours, bigger than our lives. And we also thank you and praise you for the opportunity to be a part of that plan. We pray as we go forward today, we'd be encouraged, and we would be able to share our faith, that others would see our love for you. In Jesus' name, amen.